This is Heartstock Radio. I'm your host, Carol Murphy. Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode. Today, our guest is Pasha Whitmire. In just a moment, he's going to be with us and tell us all about what he is up to. He's with Patagonia, and he's working in the materials development, and he's the lead there in that department. So really excited to hear his story here on Heartstock. Daniel Hogan is in the studio, and you can email us at heartstockradio@gmail.com. In just a moment, we will be right back with Pasha.
As I went walking and ripping the highway, I saw above me that in the skyway I saw below me that golden valley.
Welcome to Heartstock Radio. I'm your host, Carol Murphy, and today our guest is Pasha Whitmire. He is the materials development lead at Patagonia. Hi, Pasha.
Hi, Carol. How's it going?
Very well. It really perked my little ears up when I saw that you're in Bozeman. Is that where you're speaking with us from?
Yes, absolutely. I'm calling here from Bozeman.
And how did you end up in Bozeman? Is that where you're from originally?
No, actually, I'm originally from the East Coast, but my wife and I, we moved out here a couple of years ago. Really wanted to be out in the beautiful lands of Montana, and we're big into skiing and snowboarding. So she has some old childhood friends that are from here, and that's kind of how we found out about Montana and came out here. So yeah, it's been great.
How long have you been in Bozeman for?
About 2 years.
Nice.
2 years.
Nice.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about what your job at Patagonia entails as the material development lead?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Patagonia, we have a pretty robust materials and innovation team. And my job specifically is around commercialization of new product and new innovations. And specifically, the work that I do is a lot around our synthetic materials. So a lot of our technical performance materials that are going into like anything from fishing waders to ski shells and alpine climbing jackets and running shorts and all kinds of stuff like that. So my position is mainly around just trying to put together the synthetic strategy around where are these materials coming from and what good are they doing, and also how these products are kind of existing in the world and how do we build them in the most responsible way. So that's kind of been my focus, and I also develop a lot of the waterproof breathable materials, like anything for rain shells and stuff like that. So yeah.
Well, that sounds like an absolute blast, but also very challenging. So we're going to talk more about that. But you mentioned earlier that you're from the East Coast. Where did you grow up? And maybe were there influences early in life that led you to be, I guess, a material scientist? Would you consider yourself a material scientist?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have a background in material science. So I grew up in North Carolina. I was always kind of interested in like the arts, and then I kind of got into math and science and kind of looking into school. My parents kind of influenced me to kind of explore the engineering field. And that was really when I discovered material science and engineering, and specifically textile engineering, and kind of learning at that time that I didn't realize it, but textiles was just under my nose and everyone's noses at every part of our lives every day. And growing up in North Carolina, which was a big textile manufacturing state for the U.S. and greater than that even, and kind of learning about that industry and what a great impact it has on our everyday lives was kind of what led me to study textile engineering. And I've always kind of had an interest in kind of working with designers and working with businesses to kind of have an impact in the materials that our everyday lives are made from. And so that was kind of where I started out. And actually, I was a big surfer. That was like, at the time, I kind of was thinking in my head, I was going to start like developing surfboards or going and working for some boat manufacturer on fiberglass. But, I realized this is a very artisanal world. And actually where I ended up landing was in the outdoor apparel industry, just kind of discovering that, other grads from North Carolina State had gone and worked at places like Nike or, Adidas or some of these big apparel companies. And then I kind of leaned in the outdoor apparel industry. I moved out to Portland when I was in school, and I worked at Columbia Sportswear for a minute. And then out of school, my first job was up in Seattle working at REI, and I was developing materials with them. So that was kind of how I got into it and got into the outdoors, and how I've kind of come to my job today, where I've been at Patagonia for 9 years now. So,
and I'm just kind of curious if there were some major influences early on that kind of directed where you landed.
Yeah, I mean, I think I remember like a couple different moments. I mean, there was one professor that at North Carolina State, Dr. Hinks, and he was working on like a carpet recycling program. And I kind of like remember that at the time. It was like a chemical process, and it kind of like went over my head a little bit at the time. I didn't really like quite understand how much impact the textile industry had, whether it was from carbon emissions or from waste. And I think like that kind of planted a little bit of a seed for me. And then moving into the outdoor apparel space kind of further solidified that impact. And, I've had a lot of influences, even just working at Patagonia and learning from a lot of counterparts that come from a, environmental studies background, like my friends Elena and Karba on the sustainability team, right? So they've taught me so much, and I've had so many mind-blowing moments throughout my career that really helped to kind of like galvanize where I'm planned ahead and learning how like impactful the apparel industry is for the planet and those sorts of things. So I think that's kind of where a lot of my influence and inspiration comes from.
Let's talk about that impact a bit. What were some of your aha moments where you went, wow, this is far reaching and highly impactable? I mean, it's just like you said before, we're all wearing clothes, but little thought goes into, at least in the past, little thought has gone really into how I personally and what I put on my body every day is impacting the planet. I mean, I think about it all the time now, but before that aha moment, no, never really thought about it.
For sure. I mean, I think for me, getting an education in material science and textile engineering, and I didn't even really fully grasp it or understand it until later when I started working with some of these environmental scientists and running these life cycle analysis on the products we make. That was kind of when I started to really realize, what was going on or how it was occurring. And I mean, we kind of discovered that, 80 to 90% of an apparel brand's carbon footprint comes from the fabric manufacturing. And, this is including all the kind of, transportation and like me flying out to, our textile mills, mainly in Asia or elsewhere, our sales team traveling constantly, like all these things were a moot point compared to just simply the factory, the mill producing the actual fabrics for all of our apparel. So that learning that was just really like a huge mind-blowing thing, and really helped to kind of pinpoint like what we need to do to help like fix this problem that we're in. I mean, globally greenhouse gas emissions, we think that about like 10% is coming from just textile manufacturing, and it's been rapidly growing. And we think that by 2050 that it'll account for a quarter of greenhouse gas emissions if we're on the same trajectory. So it's definitely like a huge problem and like a huge impact. And so I think that's kind of, these learnings kind of help to kind of figure out like, okay, what do we do and how do we do it and how do we reduce this problem? And that's kind of like a lot of the work that I've been doing now.
Let's talk about joining Patagonia. What was that like? And was that always at the top of your list?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it was definitely like always an interest of mine. I mean, I think like getting into the outdoor apparel industry and, learning about the incredible work that Patagonia does around sustainability and especially around materials and like the investment and the value that the company puts into that is like definitely remarkable. And so I think I knew that it would always be something that I would want to do and be a part of. And so when I got there, it was really incredible to be a part of such an organization. And it's so much like broader reaching than just product and materials too, like all the work that the company does around grants and like profit going towards environmental grassroots organizations, right? So it's like more than just the product, which is also really neat to be a part of that, but just simply being a part of the product too and trying to figure out new innovative ways of building product that's more sustainable is pretty amazing. So I really have enjoyed that, and being a part of a company with such a clear mission around like we're in business to save our home planet is really like really puts everyone at the company and also and even inspires others to really rethink how we're building product and what consumerism means and all that kind of stuff. So it's been really inspiring and a really enjoyable, incredible journey, and a learning all along the way too. I think like when I first got to Patagonia 9 years ago, a lot of the performance materials that we were making weren't necessarily the most sustainable. And, still today, there's a lot of impact that comes from building these performance materials. But, I think a lot of the work that we've done and I've done in the beginning of my career was simply trying to prove that performance materials can be made from things like recycled content or sustainable raw material inputs. And, that's kind of helped to set the foundation for a lot of brands and a lot of companies today that now use recycled content or renewable materials. And now kind of we're looking at the next frontier of like next gen materials and bio-based things, and really trying to move the meter around like diversification and removal of petroleum based products and circularity and all these different sorts of sustainable buzzwords that we use now today.
Yes, and putting those buzzwords into practicality, no easy task. And I really want to delve more deeply into that in a moment. But when you first came on at Patagonia, were you originally the material development lead, or did your position kind of evolve into that over time?
Yeah, it kind of evolved. I mean, like I actually, when I first got to Patagonia, I was working in the testing lab. So I was working on a lot of materials like base layers and fleece and knits and things like that, and just trying to characterize their performance and developing new test methods to ensure the quality of those fabrics and those garments that we were putting out into the field or out into the world. And I think that was like a really good foundation to start from, because you really understand from an intimate level like exactly what it takes to build the highest level quality product. And we talk about all these things, all these sustainable buzzwords, but at the end of the day, really the most sustainable thing to do is really to have the most durable and long lasting classic apparel that you can possibly create, and buy as little as possible. And so having something like that was, starting in that testing world and that quality world was really such a great foundation for the sustainable work that I do today. And yeah, I actually quickly moved over to material development. I think that was really where a lot of my passion and interests lied, was more around like working with designers, working with the business team to kind of think about and create new product. And really it started with what I mentioned around trying to just build sustainable performance materials, which we didn't really have at that time. So I was simply a material developer, and we were creating kind of a palette of recycled shells and we had some really great wins along the way, whether it was like launching, Gore-Tex. We launched our first ever recycled materials in the shell fabric of our Gore shells. So that was kind of a big move, and that kind of impacted the whole industry that used Gore-Tex in waterproof shells. And then in like 2019, our entire shell line went and incorporated recycled content, which was also a big deal and a first. So since then, I've been continually trying to build upon that and ask really like, what does recycled mean? Where is it coming from? What good is it doing for the planet? And so I've spent a lot of time traveling, visiting different yarn manufacturing facilities and recycling plants, and really trying to understand, when we say recycled, what good is that doing, and what world problems are we solving? So, I think when I've kind of transitioned into this lead role with Patagonia, it's really been around trying to bring on new supply chains that didn't exist before and nurture ones that do exist that are really making a big difference, especially around this waste issue that we have that's escalating every year. And so we've brought on things like EcoNeil, which is a chemical recycled nylon, where they're taking carpet, which connects back to my college days, and fishing nets, and chemically recycling that back into new nylon that we can use in our products. And then most recently with Borreo, their Net Plus material, where it's 100% fishing nets coming from Chile. And that problem was really inspired by learning that, a lot of the ocean plastic waste out there is actually, a vast majority is coming from the fishing industry and from fishing gear, fishing nets being abandoned in the ocean. So that's how we kind of identified, okay, like, let's see how our product can like help with this ocean plastic pollution problem and create demand for those fishing nets so that they don't end up into the ocean. So that's kind of like an example of the kind of work that I've been doing lately and trying to lead. Yeah.
When we come back, I'm hoping we can talk more about, you mentioned bio-based materials.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to take a little break here. We'll be right back with Pasha. This is Hard Stock. This is Heartstock Radio. We're speaking with Pasha Whitmire, and he is the material development lead at Patagonia. And, I always struggle with this whole issue that you were just talking about, Pasha. Are we really doing good by the planet by recycling plastic materials as opposed to just from the get-go eliminating plastic entirely and going straight to the bio-based materials? What's your take on this? And maybe you can share with our listeners what exactly you mean when you say bio-based materials and how that's different.
Yeah, so I think that first it's kind of important to understand some of the different kinds of bio-based and biomaterials out there. And I think usually when folks in the industry are saying bio-based, they're usually referring to a synthetic material or a plastic or a polymer, that instead of the oil that was used to create that plastic, instead of it being originating from petroleum and fossil fuel extraction, we're talking about using modern day plants and those oils to create the chemical building blocks to create some of these plastics. And within that,
why is that better? How could those materials be better?
I think, it's really around moving away from fossil fuel based sources. And, we all know that fossil fuels are a finite resource. And so by moving away to something that is renewable, we can reduce the impact of extraction, first of all, and then also, using materials that are renewable. So that's kind of like the basic element of it, but there's also a lot of other implications that come with that. I think it is important to know that, like I said before, like we're in both cases, we're still building plastics and we're still building them from oils. So, generally speaking, all those impacts that come from like the production of the material still exist. So there's still like a lot of things that need to be done to kind of address those problems, especially around like the plastic formation or even the fabric formation processes. So, I think a lot of folks, they think bio-based is this holy grail that is just going to sequester carbon and it's going to solve all of our problems. But the reality is that we're still building new materials, and those new materials have a lot of carbon impact to them. So that's why we're still very much invested in recycled materials and recycling, because it really helps to lower the impact way more than building something from the ground up, right? So whether it's from petroleum or it's from bio-based feedstocks, like, agricultural feedstocks, we still have quite a large amount of impact going from the ground up like that. So yeah, the other piece that's really interesting and kind of really hopeful, I guess, about bio-based is that using bio-based oils and plant-based oils to create these products, there's kind of a little bit more of a wide variety of custom tailoring that we can do to create performance materials. So, before, when we were using fossil fuel-based feedstocks, it was quite limiting on the hydrocarbons and things like that, the types of chemistry that we're able to create. But with plant-based oils, we're able to kind of have a little bit more wide variety of performance and capabilities. We can start to figure out ways of biodegradability or more easily recyclable materials, maybe through enzymatic recycling, for example. So there's a lot of interesting like opportunities there. And also it can help fill the space where like recycling may not be possible. So like a good example is like polyurethanes, for example. Like it's a very difficult type of plastic to find recycled materials for and to recycle it. So it's a space that really makes a lot of sense to bring bio-based plastics into.
And how about non-plastic biomaterials such as hemp? I have one of my favorite Patagonia shirts is a hemp, and it's pretty durable. I love it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so, yeah, there's the whole like, and I think within the industry, we kind of we talk about that more on the natural, we call it natural side of things. So, that's anything from, cotton, and Patagonia only uses organic cotton or cotton in conversion, which means we're working with farmers to move towards organic. And we've also looked into trying to expand regenerative organic and regenerative farming, which is super interesting. And hemp is also a fascinating fiber. It's so durable. It's very soft. It really has a lot of great benefits. But, like working with all these fibers too, we've learned so much around like where the impacts are coming from and, how can we make improvements? And there's a lot of great things about using natural fibers as well, because the implications around them sticking around forever, like plastics, aren't, it's not quite as a concern. Cellulose breaks down way more easily in the environment. So there's a lot of advantages to that, especially if we're talking about, more lifestyle, everyday kind of clothing, which is what I'm wearing right now. Is I'm wearing hemp and organic cotton head to toe, right? So, it's I think when it makes sense, we can use these natural materials. There's also huge opportunity to use recycled naturals as well. I think that's the most impressive reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and energy and water that goes into producing clothing is recycled naturals is super impressive around that, because we didn't have to grow all those plants. We didn't have to use all the energy to process them, all the water to feed the plants and to process the fiber. So it really helps to save so much. And recycled is super interesting. And then going back to the regenerative, there's a lot of implications aside from just greenhouse gas emissions. It's around like soil health and biodiversity and, working with local farmers and supporting the people as well, and that's like a big deal. And, my colleague Allie has been doing a lot of amazing work of hemp in the US and trying to build that infrastructure up. We haven't really had hemp processing for, many, many years. And so trying to build that industry back up is a really big challenge, where most of the expertise is really elsewhere, whether it's in India or in China. So trying to bring that within the U.S., we can grow the hemp, but can we make the fiber is another question. So that's been a lot of work that Patagonia has been doing as well.
Yes, in the recesses of my memory, it seems like I came across a video where there was a flag made. Mm-hmm. And I think Patagonia had a hand in the making of this little mini documentary. The hemp grown in the United States, the textile created here, and then a flag was made. It's very inspiring.
Totally. Yeah.
So we have about 2 minutes left. And the first thing I was hoping that we could kind of squeeze in here at the end is a shout out to any partners that you're working with, any exciting projects that might be going on.
Yeah, I think, Patagonia and I rely really heavily on our fabric mill partners. So a lot of the mills that I specifically work with are helping to bring on a lot of these new innovations. And, folks like Pertex or Toyota, Teijin and Toray, ASF, these are all mills that I work with really closely and have been doing a fantastic job of bringing on these new material innovations. So yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't be getting anything done without them. So
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm familiar with Toray in particular, and I know that they have a lot of recycled polyester type fabrics that are
absolutely
inspiring, and they're trying to go plant-based. So we'll be watching them and their progress. That's very exciting. And how might folks find you if they'd like to carry on the conversation?
Yeah, I think it's either, you can send me an email or find me on LinkedIn. But my name is Pasha Whitmire, and my email is pasha.whitmire@patagonia.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn. Yeah, best way to get in touch, really.
Well, thank you so much for being our neighbor over there in Bozeman, first of all.
Yeah.
And coming to Montana, secondly. And thirdly, thanks for being on Heartstock, and we really appreciate you sharing your story.
Thanks for having me, Carol.
Indeedy. And as always, we will be back again next week with more exciting guests. You're going to be a hard act to follow, though, Pasha, I will have to say.
Thanks so much.
This is Heartstock. We'll see you next week. Peace.
Sun comes shining when I was strolling in the wheat fields waving and the dust clouds.
Heartstock Radio is a production of KBMF 102.5 Butte America Radio. Hear our programs every Friday at 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time via livestream at butteamericaradio.org.
As I went walking, I saw a sign there, and on the sign it said, "No trespassing," but on